Mrs. Aldrich reminds us that she writes fiction, and yet, when you hear about the story Rim of the Prairie, you'll realize that some of her parts of her life are, in fact, included in the book. In the novel, The Rim of the Prairie, there's a young man who's a banker, and he doesn't want to be a banker. He'd much rather be a writer. So he contacts this older couple on the edge of town, and he notices that they have a cob house or a woodshed that he thinks would be really a great place for him to spend his 2 weeks of vacation in the summer writing. And although the farmer thinks he's a bit peculiar for wanting to do that in the summertime, they let him. And he moves into this little cabin, and he notices that there are all these little girls' toys around in the room. And he thinks that's rather peculiar, but he opens a drawer and he finds her diary. And it wouldn't be appropriate for a young man to read a young woman's diary, but he does. And when he gets to the end of the diary, it ends with something to the effect that my life's over, I'm leaving forever. And he wonders what could be so drastic, so tragic that a young girl would want to leave the community. Well, while he's there writing, he looks out the window one day and there's a young girl. Her name happens to be Nancy, and she's kind of a free spirit, and he noticed her sliding down a haystack. And while he's there, he puts it together that she is in fact a niece and has grown up in the house and was probably the one who had the toys in the diary. And she's come home for the summer because she's been proposed to by an older man in Chicago who's a banker, and she's trying to decide whether or not to marry him. And wouldn't life be grand if you never had to worry about money? But while she's there, she's offered a teaching position at the school, and she decides that she'll put off her wedding decision for a year and move to town to a boarding house and teach. Well, while she's teaching there, she meets the banker who's also living in the same boarding house. And as you can imagine, they fall in love. He tells her that he loves her, and she seems receptive to it, but he has a business trip to take. And so he's gone, but what he doesn't realize is that there's a mean girl in town who knows a secret about a brown shawl. So this girl approaches Nancy, and Nancy leaves. And so when the young man comes home to the boarding house, he finds that she's gone. He's confused by that because he thought she loved him. Well, as a banker, he also owes another banker in Chicago some money. And when he goes to pay him, it happens to be the man that Nancy was considering marriage. And she pulls him aside and reminds him that she is not going home with him. So he leaves, but Nancy has to come home for her uncle's funeral. And when she does, she asks for a ride to the train. And she's given a ride to the train on a horse and buggy. But it's Easter Sunday, and there is a tornado that throws their horse and buggy to the side of the road. Now, tornadoes happened on Easter Sunday here in Cass County, so that is another example of where Mrs. Aldrich uses real events and makes sure that they're historically accurate. They are not hurt. They are thrown to the side of the road, and Nancy decides at that time, life's too short. Marry who you love. And so she's perfectly content and doesn't care any more about the brown shawl than anything. The young man is concerned or is interested in knowing the rest of the story. So unlike any of the rest of Mrs. Aldrich's books, there's a detective ending to this, and he goes about looking to find out what is the significance of the brown shawl. I'm sure you'll enjoy finding out what that is when you read The Rim of the Prairie.